Ma'am, the jet has landed. They're waiting for you on the tarmac. Those words stopped everything. The laughter, the clinking champagne glasses, the orchestra mid-note. Every head in the Kingsley's grand ballroom turned toward the security guard at the entrance. Then, slowly, every eye followed his gaze, straight to me. The black girl in the catering apron. The one refilling water glasses in the corner. The one they'd thrown out 2 years ago with a check and a warning not to come back. The private jet circling overhead? It wasn't for Margaret Kingsley, Boston's queen of charity and compassion. It wasn't for her golden daughters, Emily and Grace, who'd spent the evening posing for cameras. It was for me. And the man stepping off that plane wasn't arriving as a guest. He was coming to rewrite history. You know what they say about justice? Sometimes it doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it lands on your front lawn in a silver jet with your ex-boyfriend, now a billionaire, ready to tell the truth you were never allowed to speak. My name is Ariel, and this is the story of how I went from the unwanted adopted daughter discarded like yesterday's news to standing in front of those same people while the cameras rolled and my past came roaring back to claim me. But before I tell you about the jet, before the gasps and the headlines and the moment Margaret Kingsley's perfect smile cracked like porcelain, let me ask you something. Where are you right now? Are you somewhere you feel seen? Somewhere that feels like home? Because home, real home, is something I spent 18 years trying to earn. I thought if I was perfect enough, quiet enough, grateful enough, I could make them see me as family instead of charity. I thought love was something you could win through good behavior and straight A's and never, ever complaining. I was wrong. If you've ever felt like you were auditioning for a role in your own life, like you were always one mistake away from being replaced, then this story is for you. Like this video and click on the subscribe button for more stories like this. Stay with me because what happened that night, when Ethan Wright walked through those doors and said my name in front of everyone who'd pretended I never existed, changed everything I thought I knew about worth, love, and who gets to decide your story. But let me take you back to the beginning. Back to when I was 7 years old, standing in a social worker's office, staring at a photograph of the family that was about to save me. Or so I thought. But let me take you back to the beginning. Back to when I was 7 years old, standing in a social worker's office, staring at a photograph of the family that was about to save me. Or so I thought. The Kingsleys looked like something out of a storybook. Margaret's smile was warm and perfect. Charles stood tall beside her, dignified in a navy suit. Their daughters, Emily, 12, and Grace, 10, flanked them like matching bookends, blonde hair catching the sunlight, wearing identical white dresses with blue ribbons. They looked like the kind of family that baked cookies on Sundays and had inside jokes and knew each other's favorite everything. "They want you," Ms. Chun, my social worker, said softly. "They chose you, Ariel."
Chose.
That word wrapped around my heart like a promise. I'd been in foster care for 3 years by then. 3 years of temporary bedrooms and borrowed clothes and always being careful not to take up too much space. 3 years of learning that love was something that could be taken away if you weren't good enough, quiet enough, easy enough. But the Kingsleys, they wanted me, on purpose. I believed that meant I'd finally found home. The Kingsley house was everything I'd dreamed of during those long nights in group homes. A real bedroom with my name on the door. Built-in bookshelves that Margaret promised I could fill with any books I wanted. A backyard with a garden and a stone fountain and enough space to get lost in. Margaret was everything I'd imagined a mother should be. She read to me every night, and of Green Gables, A Little Princess, stories about orphan girls who found families and lived happily ever after. She'd smooth my hair back and whisper, "You're my bright little star, Ariel. Don't let anyone dim your light." When I won the third grade spelling bee, she hung my certificate on the refrigerator right between Emily's honor roll certificate and Grace's piano recital program. When I brought home straight A's, she'd tell her friends at garden parties, "Ariel is just brilliant. Top of her class. We're so proud." For a while, I thought that meant I'd made it, that I'd earned my place in the family portrait. But even at 7, I wasn't blind. I could see the way Charles's smile never quite reached his eyes when he looked at me. The way he'd introduce Emily and Grace as my daughters and me as Ariel, the girl we're helping. I could hear Emily whispering to Grace in the hallway, "Why does Mom act like she's so special? She's not even really one of us." I could feel the way people stared when we went to the country club, their eyes moving from Margaret's pale skin to mine, doing the math, landing on the word adopted like it explained everything. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. Margaret loved me. That was enough. I threw myself into being perfect, not just good, perfect. I memorized my times tables before anyone else in my class. I kept my room spotless. I never complained, never asked for too much, never forgot to say thank you for every single thing they gave me. By the time I was 10, I'd learned all the unspoken rules. Don't touch Emily's things. She'll make you pay for it later with cold silence and missing homework. Don't outshine Grace at anything creative. She needs to be the artistic one, or she'll make sure Margaret knows you're being difficult. Don't wear your hair natural for family photos. Margaret will smile that tight smile and say, "Maybe we could try something a little more polished? Just for the camera, sweetheart." Don't mention when Charles forgets your birthday, but throws elaborate parties for Emily and Grace. Don't cry when you overhear Margaret's sister say, "I don't understand why you had to adopt. You already had 2 perfectly good daughters." Just smile. Be grateful. Prove you're worth the space you're taking up. Middle school was when the cracks became too wide to ignore. I was in the accelerated program, winning academic awards, getting early acceptance into the prestigious high school Emily had attended. I thought surely that would make them proud. Emily barely looked at me the day I got my acceptance letter. "Congratulations," she said flatly. "Try not to embarrass the family name while you're there." Grace was more subtle. She'd smile sweetly and say things like, "Wow, Ariel, you work so hard. I could never be that intense. But I guess you have to be, right? To keep up?" The message was clear. I was trying too hard. I was too much. I was desperate. And maybe I was. Maybe they could smell it on me. That bone-deep fear that if I stopped being exceptional, I'd stop being loved. Charles made it even clearer. At dinner parties, when guests praised my achievements, he'd nod politely and say, "Yes, well, we believe in giving opportunities to those who need them most. It's what our foundation is all about." As if I was a tax write-off. A good deed. A before and after photo for their charitable legacy. Margaret would touch my shoulder and smile. "We're just so blessed to have her." But blessed felt different than loved. Blessed felt like something you were grateful for temporarily, not something that belonged to you forever. Still, I clung to Margaret. She was my anchor, my proof that I wasn't just a project or a performance piece. When she bragged about me to her friends, I told myself it was real. When she called me her bright little star, I let myself believe it meant I mattered. By high school, I was valedictorian, captain of the debate team, early admission to 3 Ivy League schools. I'd done everything right. But the family photos on the foundation website told a different story. There was Margaret and Charles at last year's gala, Emily and Grace flanking them, radiant in designer gowns, and me, cropped out, or not invited in the first place. I never asked why. I was too afraid of the answer. Instead, I worked harder. I volunteered at the Foundation's summer programs. I gave speeches about second chances and the power of family while standing on stages with the Kingsley name behind me in gold letters. I thought if I just kept proving myself, kept being perfect, kept making them proud, eventually they'd forget I wasn't supposed to be there. Eventually, they'd see me as Emily and Grace's equal. Eventually, they'd love me the way I loved them, desperately, completely, without conditions. I was wrong, because here's what I didn't understand at 16. Real love doesn't have a scorecard. It doesn't require perfection. It doesn't make you audition for your place at the table every single day. Real love doesn't say, "You're lucky we chose you." It says, "We're lucky we found you." And the Kingsleys? They never said that. Not once. I thought love was something you earned. I didn't know that real love doesn't need to be proven. But I was about to learn that lesson the hardest way possible. It started the fall of my junior year with a boy who had kind eyes and paint under his fingernails. Ethan Wright transferred to Ashford Academy mid-semester, the kind of timing that made him instantly interesting. New students didn't just appear at our school. Ashford was the kind of place where families had been sending their children for generations, where your last name opened doors before you even knocked. Ethan's last name didn't open anything. He showed up in a thrift store blazer that didn't quite fit and shoes that had seen better days. He carried his books in a worn backpack instead of a leather messenger bag. During lunch, while everyone else clustered in their predetermined groups, he sat alone by the window, sketching in a notebook. I noticed him because I understood what it felt like to be out of place. He noticed me, I think, because he actually looked. We were paired together for a history project on the New Deal. I remember walking up to him after class, already preparing my efficient smile, the one I used when I needed to be pleasant but not too friendly, helpful but not too eager. "Hi, I'm Ariel. Looks like we're partners." He looked up from his notebook, and something shifted in his expression. Not pity, not curiosity about why the black girl from the famous Kingsley family was talking to him. Just recognition. Like he saw me, not the story people had decided I was. "Ethan," he said and smiled. "Fair warning, I'm terrible at history, but I make pretty decent charts." That was the beginning. We met at the library to work on the project. Then we met at the coffee shop downtown because the library closed too early. Then we met just because we wanted to. Ethan didn't ask me about the Kingsleys. He didn't treat me like I was lucky or special or tragic. He asked me what music I liked, what books made me stay up too late, whether I thought the harbor looked better at sunset or sunrise. He told me about his life, the real parts, not the polished version. His dad worked as a mechanic for a private aviation company, long hours and rough hands. His mom had died when he was 12. He'd moved around a lot, stayed quiet, learned to find beauty in the spaces between noise. "That's why I draw," he said one afternoon, showing me his sketchbook. Pages filled with planes, city skylines, the curve of the harbor. It's like freezing a moment before it disappears. He'd drawn me. Just once, he admitted. From memory. Me sitting in the library, light coming through the window, book in my lap. "You looked free," he said quietly. "Like you'd forgotten to be afraid for a second." No one had ever seen that in me before. By winter, we were inseparable, and by spring, we were in love. It happened slowly, then all at once, the way first love always does. His hand finding mine during a movie, the way my heart kicked when I saw him waiting by my locker. The first kiss in his old pickup truck, parked behind the school, rain drumming on the roof. "I've never felt like this," I whispered. "Me neither," he said. "Like I've been holding my breath my whole life, and I just figured out how to breathe." We kept it secret, not because we were ashamed, but because I knew that the moment the Kingsleys found out, everything would change. Emily already watched me like a hawk, looking for mistakes. Grace had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment. Charles barely acknowledged my existence unless there were cameras around. And Margaret loved me, I thought. But her love came with conditions, rules, expectations about who I should be, how I should act, what kind of future would reflect well on the family. Ethan didn't fit that vision, so we stole our time together. Late nights after I finished my homework and he finished his shift at the diner where he worked weekends. We drive out to the cliffs overlooking Logan Airport, park the truck, and watch the planes take off and land, tiny lights rising into the dark. "Where would you go?" he asked me once. "If you could fly anywhere." "Away," I said without thinking. Then softer. "Somewhere no one knows my name. Somewhere I could just be." He was quiet for a moment. Then he took my hand. "Someday," he said, "I'm going to fly you anywhere you want. I promise." I laughed. "In what? Your truck doesn't even have working air conditioning." "I'm serious." His voice was steady, certain. "My dad's been teaching me about planes. Says I've got a gift for it. Maybe I'll get my pilot's license. Buy a plane. Take you somewhere you've never been." "Ethan Wright, pilot," I teased. But my chest felt warm. "I like the sound of that." "Ariel Wright," he said quietly. "I like the sound of that even more." For 3 months, I existed in 2 worlds. At home, I was still the perfect daughter. Straight A's. Debate team captain. Foundation volunteer. I smiled for photos at the spring gala. I laughed at Charles's jokes. I pretended not to notice when Emily whispered to her friends about how I was trying too hard, as usual. But with Ethan, I was just Ariel, not the adopted daughter, not the charity project, not the girl who had to earn her place at every table. Just me. He saw the parts of me I'd kept hidden. The girl who was tired of performing, who wanted to scream sometimes, who felt guilty for wanting more than gratitude. "You're allowed to be angry," he told me once when I broke down crying after another family dinner where Charles introduced me as the girl we're helping through our foundation. "I should be grateful," I whispered. You can be grateful and angry. They're not mutually exclusive. For the first time in my life, someone gave me permission to feel everything I'd been holding back. But secrets don't stay secret forever, especially when Emily Kingsley is looking for ammunition. I found out later that she'd followed me one night, watched Ethan pick me up in his truck, took photos, showed them to Margaret with carefully chosen words. "I'm worried about Ariel. She's been sneaking around with some boy. I just thought you should know." The summons came on a Tuesday. "Ariel, I need to speak with you in my study." Margaret's voice was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that hides something sharp underneath. I knew, walking into that room, that my two worlds were about to collide. And I knew that when they did, I'd have to choose. I just didn't realize that the choice had already been made for me. For the first time, I felt weightless. I didn't know that freedom always comes at a price. And the Kingsleys were about to send me the bill. Margaret's study had always intimidated me. Dark mahogany panels, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with first editions no one ever read. A massive desk that made whoever sat across from it feel small. I'd been called into that room exactly 3 times before. Once when I'd won the state debate championship. Once when I'd gotten early admission to Yale. Once when a photo of me at a foundation event had made the front page of the Boston Globe. Each time, Margaret had smiled and told me she was proud. This time, she didn't smile. She sat behind her desk, hands folded, perfectly composed. She was wearing pearls. She always wore pearls when she needed to remind you who held the power. "Sit down, Ariel." I sat. For a long moment, she just looked at me, not like a mother looks at a daughter, like a curator examines a painting that's been damaged. "I'm disappointed," she said finally. Those 2 words hit me like a slap. I don't understand. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you don't know what this is about." Her voice was ice. "Emily told me you've been seeing someone. A boy." My stomach dropped. "Ethan. His name is Ethan." "I don't care what his name is." She leaned forward slightly. "What I care about is that you've been sneaking around behind our backs, lying to us, risking this family's reputation for some teenage infatuation." "It's not," my voice cracked. "It's not just infatuation. I love him." The word love hung in the air like something obscene. Margaret's expression didn't change. "You're 17 years old. You don't know what love is." "I know what it feels like to be seen," I said, and hated how my voice shook. "To be wanted for who I am, not what I represent." Something flickered across her face. For a second I thought it might be guilt. It wasn't. "Ariel." She said my name like she was explaining something to a child. "We have given you everything. A home, an education, a family name that opens doors. Do you have any idea what kind of future that guarantees you?" I didn't ask for. "No, you didn't ask. You were chosen." She stood up, walking around the desk. "Do you think that choice was easy? Do you think there weren't challenges, questions, sacrifices?" I felt something inside me crack. Sacrifices. Charles's family didn't approve. My friends had concerns. But I fought for you. I believed in you. She paused in front of me. "And this is how you repay me? By throwing yourself at some boy from nowhere? Someone who can't offer you anything." "He offers me honesty," I whispered. He doesn't make me feel like I have to earn my place every single day. Margaret's face went cold. If you feel that way, then perhaps you haven't been paying attention to everything we've done for you. She walked back to her desk, pulled out a folder, and handed it to me. Inside were photos. Me and Ethan at the harbor, in his truck, outside the coffee shop. Emily's surveillance, carefully documented. You've been reckless, Margaret said. People are starting to talk. My friends are asking questions. Is everything all right with your daughter? Is she going through something? I'm not going through anything. I'm just... You're making a mistake. Her voice was final. And I won't let you drag this family down with you. I found out later what she did. She called Ethan's father, told him that Ethan was involving himself inappropriately with a troubled girl. She suggested that perhaps Ethan needed to focus on his future, that his father's position with the aviation company could be complicated if there were any further incidents. She called the headmaster at Ashford Academy, expressed concern about my emotional state, wondered if I was struggling to adjust, and whether I might benefit from some distance from certain influences. She told her friends at the country club that I'd been acting out, rebelling, that they were trying to help, but I was ungrateful and unstable. She didn't just separate us. She humiliated us. She rewrote our story before we even had a chance to tell it. And then she made sure Ethan couldn't reach me. His calls were blocked. His messages deleted. The letters he left at the front gate were thrown away before I ever saw them. For 2 weeks, I waited for him to call, to text, to show up. He never did. I thought he'd abandoned me. That whatever we'd had wasn't strong enough to survive his father's disapproval or the Kingsley name's power. I thought I'd been wrong about him, about us, about everything. I didn't know Margaret had built a wall between us and made sure I believed he'd chosen to walk away. The day they kicked me out, I came home from school to find boxes in the hallway. My boxes. My books, my clothes, my entire life packed up like I was moving out for college. Except I wasn't going to college. Not yet. I was just going. Charles was standing in the foyer, hands in his pockets, looking everywhere except at me. Dad. My voice sounded small. What's happening? Your mother thinks. He cleared his throat. She thinks it's best if you start your own life. You're 21 now. I'm 17. Nearly 18, he corrected, like that made it better. Old enough to be independent. We've set up a small trust fund. Enough to get you started. Started with what? My heart was racing. Where am I supposed to go? There's an apartment. Already arranged. In Southie. Nothing fancy, but it's yours. I don't understand. I looked around wildly. Did I do something? Is this because of Ethan? Because I can. This isn't a negotiation, Ariel. Margaret's voice came from the top of the stairs. She descended slowly, gracefully, like she was making an entrance at one of her galas. She was holding an envelope. We've been more than generous, she said, handing it to me. This should help you transition. I opened it with shaking hands. A check. $20,000. And a letter on foundation letterhead. A character reference stating that I'd been a challenging but ultimately rewarding placement. Placement. Like I was a foster child they'd been housing temporarily. Like I'd never really been family at all. You can't be serious, I whispered. You've made your choices. Margaret said coolly. Now you live with them. I chose to love someone. That's all I did. You chose to be ungrateful. Her voice was sharp now. After everything we gave you, every opportunity, every advantage, and still it wasn't enough. Because it wasn't love. The words exploded out of me. You never loved me. You loved the idea of me. The story you could tell about your modern, diverse, perfect family. But the moment I stopped being the right kind of charity case. That's enough. Charles's voice was quiet but firm. You need to go. I looked at him, at Margaret, at Emily, watching from the landing with her arms crossed, at Grace, peeking around the corner with something like satisfaction in her eyes. Not one of them looked sorry. You should be grateful we raised you as long as we did, Margaret said. And that was it, the final proof. I'd never been their daughter. I'd been their project, their good deed, their proof of concept. And now the project was over. I left in the rain. The driver they'd hired loaded my boxes into a black car without meeting my eyes. I stood on the circular driveway, soaked through, staring back at the mansion. Every window glowed warm and golden. The fountain in the gardens sparkled with lights. The Kingsley crest was carved above the front door, a symbol of legacy and belonging. A life I'd never been meant to keep. The car pulled away, and I watched the house disappear in the rain-streaked window. That night, I learned there's a pain worse than being unwanted. It's realizing you were never truly loved. And somewhere in the city, Ethan was probably moving on, thinking I'd chosen them over him. Neither of us knew the truth yet. Neither of us knew this was only the beginning. The apartment above the laundromat smelled like bleach and broken promises. One room, a kitchenette with a hot plate that only worked half the time, a bathroom with tiles that had probably been white in 1970, a window that looked out onto a brick wall exactly 6 feet away. The real estate agent had called it cozy. I called it survival. The first night, I sat on the bare mattress, the only furniture I could afford after buying sheets and a lamp, and tried not to think about my old bedroom, the built-in bookshelves, the window seat where I used to read, the way morning light would filter through lace curtains and make everything feel safe. This place had no curtains, just blinds with missing slats that let streetlight bleed through in stripes. I pulled my knees to my chest and told myself this was temporary, that I'd figured out, that I was smart and capable and I'd survived worse. Except I hadn't, actually. I'd survived being unwanted in foster care, but I'd never survived being unchosen. There's a special kind of pain in being picked, loved, or so you thought, and then discarded like you were defective merchandise with a no-return policy. Below me, the laundromat's machines hummed and clanked. Someone was doing laundry at midnight. I'd learn later that this was normal, that this building never really slept, that the mechanical rhythm of wash and spin and dry would become the soundtrack to my new life. I lay down and stared at the water-stained ceiling. This was home now. This was what happened when you stopped being useful to the Kingsleys. I found work fast, I had to. The $20,000 Margaret gave me wouldn't last long, not with rent and food and the reality that I still had to finish high school. I'd transferred to South Boston High, where no one knew my name or cared about my pedigree. First job, morning barista at Common Grounds, a coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment. I showed up at 5 a.m. to prep, memorized orders, learned to smile when customers were rude because tips paid for groceries. Second job, night server at Marcello's, an Italian restaurant where the owner paid cash and didn't ask too many questions. I worked the dinner shift, carrying heavy trays and pretending my feet didn't hurt, pretending I didn't see pity in people's eyes when I told them I was saving for college. Between shifts, I studied. Between studying, I slept. Between sleeping, I tried not to think about Ethan. But late at night, when the laundromat finally went quiet and the city settled into its restless half-sleep, I'd think about him anyway. Why didn't he fight for me? Why didn't he call? Did Margaret scare him off that easily? Or maybe he'd realized what everyone else had, that I wasn't worth the trouble. The Kingsleys, meanwhile, erased me. I found out 3 weeks after I left when I Googled the foundation's website, something I shouldn't have done, but loneliness makes you do stupid things. The family photo on the homepage had been updated. Margaret, Charles, Emily, and Grace. Smiling. Complete. Perfect. No gap where I used to stand. No awkward crop marks. Just nothing. Like I'd never existed. I clicked through the site with shaking hands. The Our Family page listed 3 Kingsley children: Emily, Harvard Law; Grace, Parsons School of Design. No mention of Ariel. No footnote about the girl they'd adopted and raised for 10 years. I was gone. Not just removed, but revised. They'd rewritten their history without me in it. I closed the laptop and didn't cry. I'd learned by then that crying was a luxury I couldn't afford. Crying took energy, and I needed every ounce of energy to survive. But it hurt. God, it hurt. To know that the family I desperately tried to belong to had simply moved on. Like I was a phase. A failed experiment. A story they decided wasn't worth telling. I heard about Ethan through the grapevine, the cruel, careless way you hear about people who've moved on while you're still stuck. Sarah Chen, a girl from Ashford who sometimes came into common grounds, mentioned it casually while ordering her latte. Did you hear about Ethan Wright? That quiet guy who transferred junior year. My hands froze on the espresso machine. What about him? He's in Europe somewhere. His dad died, some kind of accident. Really tragic. She scrolled through her phone. But apparently his dad owned a huge aviation company, and Ethan inherited it. People are saying he's like stupid rich now. CEO at 19 or something. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear her. That's crazy, I managed. Right? He was so quiet. Who knew? She took her latte and left. I stood there, milk steaming in the pitcher, trying to process. Ethan's dad was dead. Ethan had inherited a company. Ethan was in Europe, building a new life, while I was here, pulling double shifts and living above a laundromat. The boy who'd promised to fly me anywhere had grown wings. Real ones, not metaphorical, and flown away without me. The contrast was brutal. I'd see photos sometimes. Not of Ethan directly, but tagged references. Business journals mentioning Wright Aviation's young CEO bringing innovation to private flight. Social media posts from Ashford kids who'd apparently stayed in touch. Ran into Ethan in London. Crazy how much has changed. His world was jets and boardrooms and international summits. Mine was burnt coffee and rude customers and the guy at Marcello's who kept, accidentally, brushing against me when I walked by. His world was expanding. Mine was shrinking. I told myself it didn't matter, that he'd moved on just like the Kingsleys had, that I needed to do the same. But some nights, when I couldn't sleep, I'd stand at my window and watch the sky. Logan Airport wasn't far. Planes took off and landed at all hours, tiny lights cutting through darkness, carrying people toward futures I could only imagine. I'd think about the cliff, the nights we'd spent watching planes together, the way Ethan's voice had sounded when he made me that promise. Someday, I'm going to fly you anywhere you want. I'd believed him then. Now it felt like a cruel joke. The boy who'd promised me wings had built an empire in the sky while I was stuck on the ground, watching from a window in a building that smelled like industrial detergent and defeat. 6 months after I left the Kingsleys, I graduated high school. No one came to the ceremony. No family photos. No celebration dinner. I walked across that stage, accepted my diploma, and went straight to my evening shift at Marcello's. That night, carrying a tray of wine glasses to a table full of people celebrating their daughter's college acceptance, I heard one of them say, "She's going to Yale. We're so proud." Yale, where I was supposed to go, where I'd gotten early admission. I'd withdrawn my application 3 months earlier. Couldn't afford it. Couldn't even imagine that version of my life anymore. I set down the glasses with steady hands and smiled my server smile. "Congratulations," I said. "That's wonderful." And I meant it, even though it broke something inside me. 1 year. 2 years. Time moved, but I felt stuck. The laundromat hummed. The coffee brewed. The plates went out and came back and went out again. I saved money slowly. Applied to community college. Thought about the future in small, manageable increments. But sometimes, on clear nights when I was walking home from Marcello's, exhausted and alone, I'd see a jet passing overhead, lights blinking against stars, and I'd stop. I'd remember Ethan's hands on the steering wheel, the sound of his laugh, the way he'd looked at me like I was worth more than gratitude. And I'd wonder if he ever looked down at the city and thought of me, if he remembered his promises, if he knew that I'd waited for him to come back. He once said he'd fly me anywhere I wanted. I didn't know he meant he'd have to build his own wings first. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that he was building those wings for both of us. And that 2 years later, he'd come back. Not with an apology, with a jet. The invitation came in the form of a phone call. "Ariel? It's Marcus from Premier Events. Listen, we've got a big one Saturday night, the Kingsley Foundation Gala. Major donors, press coverage, the works. I need all hands on deck." I was folding napkins at Marcello's during the afternoon lull, phone tucked between my ear and shoulder. The Kingsley Foundation? Yeah, you know them? Big charity family, old money. Annual gala for underprivileged youth. He laughed. Ironic, right? Rich people throwing a party to celebrate helping poor kids. But hey, they tip well, and we need the contract. My hands had stopped moving. The Kingsleys, the mansion, the ballroom where I used to hide during their events, watching from the stairs in my pajamas while Margaret smiled for cameras and talked about giving children second chances. "Ariel, you there?" "Yeah, sorry." Where is it?" "Their estate in Beacon Hill. Black and white service attire. Saturday, 5 p.m. setup. You in?" I should have said no. I should have invented an excuse. Any excuse. a conflict, an illness, a sudden urgent need to be literally anywhere else. But something inside me, something sharp and defiant and tired of hiding, said yes. I'm in. I told myself I was doing it for the money. Premier events paid better than Marcello's, and I needed every dollar for the spring semester at Bunker Hill Community College. But that was a lie. I was doing it because some sick, twisted part of me wanted to see them again. Wanted to stand in that house and prove to myself that I'd survived. That I was still here, still breathing, still moving forward, even if forward meant serving champagne to people who wouldn't recognize me. Or maybe I wanted them to see me and feel something, guilt, shame, regret. Anything that proved I'd mattered, even a little. The night before the gala, I stood in my tiny bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. 2 years had changed me. I was thinner, not in a healthy way, in the way of someone who sometimes chose rent over groceries. My hair was pulled back in a tight bun. My eyes were harder, older, carrying exhaustion that 21-year-olds shouldn't know yet. I looked like someone who'd learned that the world doesn't owe you anything. I looked like someone who'd survived being unwanted. I looked like me. Saturday arrived with cruel, perfect weather. Blue skies. Golden autumn light. The kind of day that made Boston look like a postcard, all brick and history and old money glowing in the afternoon sun. I took the T to Beacon Hill, then walked the last few blocks. Each step closer to the mansion felt like walking backward through time. There was the park where Margaret used to take us for photos. There was the corner store where Grace and Emily would buy candy and forget to get me any. There was the iron gate I used to count the bars on while waiting for the driver to pick me up from school. And there, rising above the trees, was the house. It looked exactly the same. Imposing, beautiful, indifferent. I walked to the service entrance like I'd been instructed. Not the front door, never the front door. That was for guests, for family, for people who mattered. I was staff now. Somehow, that felt appropriate. The kitchen was chaos. 20 catering staff rushing between stations, Marcus barking orders, the head chef screaming about garnishes. I tied on my apron, smoothed my white shirt, and slipped into the familiar rhythm of service. First time working a Kingsley event? Asked the girl next to me, arranging shrimp on a platter. Yeah, I lied. They're intense, super particular. But the mom, Margaret? She's supposed to be really nice. Like, genuinely cares about charity work. She rolled her eyes. Though I guess it's easy to care when you're that rich. I focused on the wine glasses I was polishing. I guess so. Her daughters are here tonight too. One's engaged to a senator's son. Can you imagine? This is literally how the other half lives. I could imagine. I'd lived it. Or thought I had. At 6 p.m., the guests started arriving. Through the kitchen doors, I could hear the swell of voices, the string quartet tuning up, the familiar sounds of the Kingsley social machine coming to life. Marcus lined us up for final instructions. Remember, you're invisible. Smile. Serve. Don't engage in conversation unless spoken to. These people are here to see each other, not us. Got it? Invisible. I'd had practice. The ballroom took my breath away, just like it always had. Crystal chandeliers throwing light like diamonds. Flowers everywhere, white roses, probably $50,000 worth. Round tables draped in silk, each setting worth more than my monthly rent. And the people. God, the people. Women in gowns that cost what I made in 6 months. Men in tuxedos, confidence worn as casually as their expensive watches. Everyone beautiful, everyone belonging, everyone certain of their place in the world. I moved through them with a tray of champagne, eyes down, muscle memory taking over. Smile. Offer. Move on. Don't look too long. Don't listen too hard. Don't remember that you used to belong here. Except I never did I? I saw Emily first. She was holding court near the silent auction table, her left hand positioned conspicuously to catch the light. The engagement ring was impossible to miss, easily 3 carats, surrounded by smaller diamonds that sparkled like captured stars. Bradley proposed at Martha's Vineyard, she was saying to a circle of admirers. His father arranged for a private beach. It was incredibly romantic. Bradley Ashford, Senator Ashford's son. Old money marrying older money, the way it was supposed to work. She looked radiant, happy, like someone who'd never known what it felt like to be discarded. I moved past her, a ghost in black and white. She didn't even glance at me. Grace was near the bar, laughing with a group of young philanthropists. She'd cut her hair shorter, sophisticated. She was wearing a dress I recognized from her Instagram. Red designer, the kind of thing she'd post with hashtags about supporting emerging artists. The Foundation's youth mentorship program has been transformative, she was saying. We've placed over 100 kids in internships this year. It's really about giving them opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. Kids like me, I thought. Kids you'd never actually let into your life. I offered her group champagne. Grace took a glass without looking at me. Thank you, she said absently, already turning back to her conversation. I was 3 feet away from her. She had no idea. Then I saw Margaret. She was on the small stage at the front of the ballroom, microphone in hand, radiant in navy silk, pearls at her throat, hair perfect, smile practiced and genuine at once. The room quieted as she began to speak. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Her voice carried that warm authority I remembered so well. Our family has always believed that every child, regardless of their circumstances, deserves a second chance. A real chance. Not charity, but opportunity. Applause rippled through the room. I stood near the kitchen door, tray balanced on my hip, and listened. Tonight, we're honoring the young people who've transformed their lives through our programs. These are children who've overcome incredible obstacles, poverty, family instability, systemic barriers. Children who just needed someone to believe in them. More applause. My chest felt tight. Emily and Grace have been instrumental in expanding our reach, Margaret continued, gesturing to her daughters. They understand that privilege comes with responsibility, that those of us who have been given much must give back. The cameras flashed as Emily and Grace stood, smiling, waving graciously. The perfect family, the complete picture. No gaps, no missing pieces, no ghost of an adopted daughter they'd erased from the narrative. Our family believes every child deserves a second chance, Margaret concluded, her voice rich with conviction. I felt the tray tremble in my hands. Every child, except the one they threw away. I moved through the rest of the evening like I was underwater. Serving, clearing, refilling. A body in motion, a mind somewhere else. They didn't recognize me. Not Emily, standing 5 feet away, laughing about her honeymoon plans. Not Grace, who'd once shared a bathroom with me, who'd borrowed my notes for biology, who'd told me I was trying too hard to fit in. Not Margaret, who'd read me bedtime stories and called me her bright little star and then handed me a check and told me to be grateful. They didn't recognize me, not as a sister, not as family, not even as human. I was invisible, just like Marcus said I should be. But karma did. It was already on its way, and it was flying. The sound started low, distant, like thunder rolling in from the harbor. At first, no one noticed. The orchestra was playing, conversations flowing, champagne glasses clinking in that particular rhythm of wealth and celebration. But then it grew louder. A deep, mechanical roar that didn't belong to the city's usual soundtrack. Not a commercial flight from Logan. This was closer, lower, more intentional. The chandeliers began to tremble. Conversations faltered. Heads turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate's grounds. "What is that?" someone asked. The roar became deafening. And then we saw it. A jet, sleek, silver, impossibly elegant, descending from the twilight sky. Not toward Logan Airport, but here. Toward the Kingsley's private airstrip at the far end of the property. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests rushed to the windows, champagne forgotten. Security guards spoke urgently into their radios. Margaret's smile froze on her face, microphone still in hand. "Is someone expecting a plane?" Charles demanded, looking at his assistant. The assistant's face was pale. "No, sir." Nothing was scheduled. The jet touched down with practiced precision, its lights cutting through the dusk like a blade. Even from this distance, you could see it was expensive. The kind of aircraft that didn't just cost money, it cost the kind of money that made the Kingsleys' wealth look quaint. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "Look at the tail number. That's Wright Aviation." The name rippled through the crowd like electricity. Wright Aviation? The tech billionaire? "I heard he's only 23. What's he doing here?" My heart had stopped beating. My tray was shaking so badly, I had to set it down before I dropped it. Wright Aviation. Ethan. No, it couldn't be. But even as I thought it, even as I tried to convince myself I was wrong, the jet's door opened, and he stepped out. 2 years had changed him the way they'd changed me, except where I'd been diminished, he'd been forged. Ethan Wright walked down those jet stairs like he owned the sky he'd just descended from. Black suit, perfectly tailored. No tie, just an open collar that somehow made him look more powerful, not less. His hair was shorter, more controlled. His shoulders broader. His entire presence radiating the kind of confidence that comes from building something impossible and succeeding. But his eyes, God, his eyes were the same. That same gentle intensity, one remembered. He paused at the bottom of the stairs, scanning the mansion, and I knew with absolute certainty what he was looking for. Who he was looking for. Behind him, 2 figures emerged from the jet. Camera crews. Professional equipment. Microphones with network logos. This wasn't a visit. This was a statement. Security guards rushed toward the airstrip, but Ethan's own security, 2 men built like walls, intercepted them smoothly. There was a brief conversation, hands raised in placating gestures, and then one of the Kingsley guards spoke into his radio. Whatever Ethan said, whoever he'd contacted beforehand, it worked. because moments later, he was walking toward the mansion. Toward us.
Toward me.
The ballroom had gone completely silent. 300 people, Boston's elite, the city's power brokers, the kind of people who usually controlled every room they entered, stood frozen, watching through the windows as Ethan Wright crossed the grounds with his security and his camera crews. Margaret had descended from the stage, her face a careful mask. But I could see the calculation in her eyes, the panic hiding beneath her composed exterior. "Charles," she hissed, "did you know about this?" "Of course not," he snapped back. "Handle it." "Me?" "You handle it. He's." The main ballroom doors opened. Every head turned. Ethan stood in the entrance, backlit by the hallway lights, and for a moment he just looked at the room, at the crystal and silk and diamonds, at the people in their expensive clothes, wearing their expensive smiles, at the empire of image and illusion the Kingsleys had built. Then his eyes found me. I was standing near the kitchen door, still in my server's uniform, frozen like a deer in headlights. He smiled.
Soft. Warm.
Like coming home. And he started walking. Not to Margaret. Not to Charles. Not to the Kingsley daughters who'd posted photos with him years ago and were now staring with open mouths.
To me.
The crowd parted like water. Camera flashes started immediately. The news crews Ethan brought, plus guests pulling out their phones. This was going to be everywhere. Instagram, Twitter, the morning news. Whatever was about to happen would be documented from every angle. Ethan stopped in front of me. Up close, I could see the details. The fine lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before. The silver watch on his wrist that probably cost more than my apartment. The way he was looking at me like I was the only person in the room. "Hello, Ariel," he said softly. His voice was deeper than I remembered, but still unmistakably him. "I told you I'd fly to you someday." My throat closed. I couldn't speak.
Couldn't breathe.
He reached out, slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't want to. His hand closed around mine, warm, solid, real, and suddenly everything that had felt impossible for 2 years crystallized into this single moment. "I looked for you," I whispered. "I thought you left." "I know." Pain flashed across his face. "I know what they told you, what they made you believe. I'm sorry it took me this long." "Excuse me." Margaret's voice cut through the moment like ice. She was walking toward us, smile in place, but her eyes were sharp. "Mr. Wright, what a surprise. I'm not sure we've been properly introduced. I'm Margaret Kingsley, and this is..." "I know who you are." Ethan didn't let go of my hand. "I know exactly who you are." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Margaret's smile tightened. "I'm afraid there's been some confusion. This young woman is staff, not a guest. If you're looking for her..." "This woman," Ethan said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom, "is Ariel Kingsley, your adopted daughter. The one you raised for 10 years and then threw away when she stopped being useful to your image." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Margaret's face went white. That's not." "The one you erased from your website," Ethan continued. "From your family photos. From your history. The one you told everyone was troubled and ungrateful, when the truth was she was the best thing that ever happened to this family, and you were too blind to see it." The cameras were recording everything. Every word. Every expression. Mr. Wright. Charles stepped forward, voice hard with authority. I don't know what you think you know, but I know everything. Ethan turned to face them fully, but kept holding my hand. I know how you humiliated my father, how you blocked our calls, how you made Ariel believe I'd abandoned her when I was trying every way I could to reach her.
He squeezed my hand.
I know that when my father died, I inherited Wright Aviation. And I know that I spent the last 2 years building it into something powerful enough that you couldn't ignore me, couldn't erase me, couldn't make me disappear the way you made her disappear. The silence was absolute. Even the orchestra had stopped playing. Ethan turned back to me, and his voice softened. I'm sorry I couldn't come back sooner. I had to build something first. Had to make sure that when I came for you, I was strong enough that they couldn't hurt you again. Tears were streaming down my face now. I didn't care. He turned to the crowd, to the cameras, to the 300 people watching this moment unfold. Ladies and gentlemen, he said clearly, I'm Ethan Wright, CEO of Wright Aviation. And I'm here tonight to introduce you to the strongest, most resilient woman I've ever known. The woman this family claimed to love, then discarded like she was nothing. He pulled me closer, his arm around my waist, steady and sure. My fiancée, Ariel. The ballroom exploded.
Gasps. Shouts.
Camera flashes like lightning. Reporters shouting questions. Guests pulling out phones, already posting, already spreading the news. Margaret looked like she'd been slapped. Emily's mouth was hanging open. Grace had gone pale. Charles was trying to speak, but no one was listening to him anymore. The Kingsleys' empire of image, their carefully constructed narrative of charity and compassion and the perfect family, was crumbling in real time. And I stood there, still in my server's uniform, hand in Ethan's, while the world watched. No longer invisible, no longer erased, no longer the discarded daughter who didn't matter. For the first time in 2 years, I let myself smile. Hello, Ethan, I whispered. Welcome home. The ballroom was chaos. Reporters shouting questions. Guests crowding closer, phones raised, capturing every angle. Security trying to establish order but failing spectacularly because how do you control a story that's already gone viral? Margaret was trying to regain control, her voice rising above the noise. Everyone, please, there's been a misunderstanding. But no one was listening to her anymore. For the first time in her carefully orchestrated life, Margaret Kingsley had lost control of her narrative. Ethan's security formed a protective barrier around us. One of them leaned in, spoke quietly. Sir, the car's ready when you are. Ethan looked at me. Do you want to leave? I looked around the ballroom. At the Kingsleys scrambling, at the guests recording everything, at the life I'd once desperately wanted to be part of, now exposed and crumbling. Not yet, I said. I think we need to talk. All of us. 10 minutes later, we were in Charles's study, the same room where Margaret had told me I was making a mistake, where they decided my fate without letting me speak. Now it was different. Now I had Ethan beside me. Now I had cameras outside the door. Now I had the truth, and they couldn't erase it. Margaret sat in the leather chair behind the desk, trying to maintain her authority. Charles stood by the window, jaw tight. Emily and Grace flanked their parents like guards, but their confidence was fracturing. Ethan's attorney stood near the door, a sharp woman in her 50s who'd arrived with the jet crew. She held a tablet and a folder thick with documents. "This is absurd," Charles started. "Barging in here with cameras, making accusations." "Everything I said was true." Ethan cut him off. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Would you like me to prove it?" "You have no proof of anything," Margaret said coldly. "Whatever Ariel told you." "Ariel didn't tell me anything. She didn't know where I was." Ethan's hand tightened around mine. "Because you made sure she couldn't reach me, just like you made sure I couldn't reach her." He nodded to his attorney, who opened the folder. "These are phone records," she said, laying out pages. "Calls from Ethan Wright to the Kingsley residence. 23 calls over 2 weeks. All blocked." Margaret's face remained impassive, but I saw her fingers tighten on the armrest. "These are letters," the attorney continued, producing a stack of envelopes. "Written by Mr. Wright, delivered to your gate. According to your former security guard, who was happy to provide a statement, you ordered them destroyed without Miss Kingsley ever seeing them." "That's," Grace started. "We have a signed affidavit," the attorney said calmly, "from Timothy Morrison. He was fired 6 months after these events. He's been waiting for an opportunity to tell the truth." Emily's face went pale. "You lied to her," Ethan said, looking at Margaret. "You told Ariel I'd abandoned her. You told my father I was pursuing a troubled girl who would ruin my future. You manipulated both of us." "We were protecting our family," Margaret said tightly. "You were a distraction." She needed to focus on her future, not some teenage romance that would go nowhere. "You were protecting your image," Ethan corrected, "because a white working-class boy dating your black adopted daughter didn't fit your narrative. It made your charity look messy. Real." The words hung in the air like an accusation. "That's not fair," Grace said, but her voice wavered. "Isn't it?" Ethan turned to her. "Tell me, Grace, when's the last time you mentioned Ariel? When's the last time any of you told people you had another sister?" Silence. "You erased her," Ethan said quietly. "Not because she did anything wrong, but because she reminded you that your compassion had limits." "There's more," the attorney said, and I heard something dangerous in her voice. She pulled out another folder. This one was thicker. "In the process of locating Miss Kingsley, we did extensive research on the Kingsley Foundation. What we found was interesting." Charles straightened. "Our foundation is beyond reproach. Your foundation has been inflating its charitable contributions for years." The attorney's voice was crisp, professional. "Tax documents show donations that never reached their intended recipients. Scholarship programs that exist on paper but have never actually funded students. Grant applications that were approved for publicity, then quietly withdrawn." Margaret stood up. "That's defamatory. It's documented." The attorney didn't flinch. "We have bank records, testimony from former employees, email chains discussing how to maximize optics while minimizing actual expense. Your charity isn't charity, Mrs. Kingsley. It's a tax shelter with good PR." The room went dead silent. Emily's face was white. "Mom, this is a private family matter," Charles said, but his voice had lost its authority. "It stopped being private the moment you made Ariel's life a public spectacle," Ethan said. "The moment you told everyone she was troubled and ungrateful." You made her story public. Now I'm making yours public too. He looked at Margaret. You told her to be grateful you raised her as long as you did. Like she was a burden. Like love was something she had to earn and failed to. Margaret's mask was cracking. You don't understand what it's like to. To what? To adopt a child and actually love them. Ethan's voice was hard. Plenty of people manage it. Real families manage it. You just wanted the credit without the commitment. I'd been quiet through all of this, letting Ethan speak, letting the truth unfold. But now I found my voice. I used to lie awake wondering what I did wrong, I said softly. Everyone turned to look at me. I thought if I'd just been smarter, quieter, more grateful, if I'd just been better, you would have loved me. Margaret's eyes were glistening, but I couldn't tell if it was real emotion or damage control. But I wasn't the problem, I continued. I was never the problem. You were. Ariel, Margaret started. You taught me that family was something you earned through perfection, that love had conditions, that I should be grateful for scraps of affection because I wasn't worthy of the whole thing. My voice was steady now, strong. You taught me to be grateful for what I'm given. So now, I'm grateful you let me go. Emily made a choked sound. Grace looked away. Because if you hadn't thrown me away, I would have spent my whole life trying to be enough for people who were never going to see me as family. I would have wasted myself on your approval. I stood up, still holding Ethan's hand. Instead, I learned what real love looks like. Love that doesn't need to be earned. Love that doesn't erase you when you become inconvenient. Margaret's face crumpled. For the first time, she looked genuinely broken. I did love you, she whispered. I did, Ariel. I didn't know how to love someone who didn't look like you. I finished. How to love someone when it was hard, when people asked questions. She didn't answer. I took a breath. I forgive you, I said. Everyone looked shocked, none more than Margaret. I forgive you, I repeated. Not because you deserve it, but because holding on to this is keeping me in your story. And I'm done living in your story. I turned to Ethan. I'm ready to leave now. As we walked out of the study, I heard raised voices behind us. Emily, Mom, is it true? About the foundation? Grace, you said we were helping people. Charles, everyone calm down. Margaret, this is your fault, Charles. You said adopting would be good for our image. Their perfect family was imploding. I should have felt satisfaction. Victory. Some kind of vindication. Instead, I just felt free. We walked through the ballroom, now empty except for cleanup crew and a few lingering reporters. They tried to ask questions, but Ethan's security kept them at bay. Outside, the jet waited on the airstrip, lights glowing against the dark sky. As we walked toward it, I looked back at the mansion one last time. The house where I'd spent 10 years trying to belong. The house where I'd learned that blood doesn't make family, and sometimes neither does choice. Any regrets? Ethan asked softly. I thought about it. Really thought about it. No, I said finally. They made me believe I was their project, but I was always God's purpose. Ethan smiled and squeezed my hand. We climbed the stairs into the jet, into the future he'd built for both of us. And as the door closed behind us, as the engines roared to life, As we lifted off into the night sky, I finally understood what Ethan had promised me all those years ago. He'd said he'd fly me anywhere I wanted. What he really meant was, he'd help me fly away from the people who'd clipped my wings. And now, finally, I was free. And as the door closed behind us, as the engines roared to life, as we lifted off into the night sky, I finally understood what Ethan had promised me all those years ago. He'd said he'd fly me anywhere I wanted. What he really meant was, he'd help me fly away from the people who'd clipped my wings. And now, finally, I was free. The jet's interior was nothing like I'd imagined. I'd pictured cold luxury, all leather and chrome, the kind of sterile wealth that the Kingsleys would have chosen. But this was different. Warm wood paneling, soft lighting, comfortable seats that felt like being wrapped in clouds. There were books on a shelf, real books, worn and loved. A blanket draped over one of the seats. Through the cockpit door, I could see the pilots, professionals, focused, bringing us higher into the night. I designed it myself, Ethan said, watching me take it all in. Wanted it to feel like home, or at least what I imagined home should feel like. I turned to look at him, really look at him. 2 years had changed him from the boy with paint under his fingernails into a man who commanded boardrooms and built empires. But underneath the expensive suit and the confidence, he was still Ethan. Still the person who'd seen me when I was invisible to everyone else. "How did you find me?" I asked. He guided me to one of the seats near the window. Below us, Boston was spreading out, a constellation of lights, the harbor dark and glittering, the city getting smaller by the second. "I never stopped looking," he said simply. "After my father died, after I inherited the company, the first thing I did was hire investigators. Took them 6 months to track you down. You'd changed your phone number, moved apartments. It was like you'd disappeared. I was trying to survive," I whispered. "I know." His voice was soft. "And I'm sorry I couldn't get to you sooner. But I had to. I had to build something first. Something big enough that when I came back, they couldn't hurt you again. Couldn't dismiss us. Couldn't make you disappear." He took my hand. "My father used to say that in aviation, timing is everything. Take off too early and you crash. Too late and you miss your window. I had to wait until I had enough power to protect you, to make sure that when the world heard your story, they'd listen. The cameras," I said, understanding. "The news crews. You planned all of this. Every second." He smiled slightly. "I've had 2 years to think about this moment. How to make sure the truth came out. How to make sure they couldn't spin it, bury it, or erase you again." Below us, the Kingsley mansion was a tiny glowing square, already distant, already part of the past. "By morning," Ethan said, "this will be everywhere. Social media, news networks, morning shows. The story of the Kingsleys' adopted daughter, thrown away and forgotten, until her boyfriend came back with a jet and the truth." "I'm not their daughter anymore," I said quietly. "No," he agreed. "You're not. You're just you, Ariel, the woman who survived them, who became stronger than they ever imagined." The jet climbed higher. The city became a carpet of lights, spreading to the horizon. The sky above us was infinite, dark and star-scattered and endless. Ethan shifted to face me fully. "They made you think you were unwanted," he said, and his voice was fierce with conviction. Let's show the world you were never the problem. And then he kissed me. Not the tentative kiss of teenagers in a pickup truck. Not the uncertain touch of two people afraid of losing each other. This was a kiss that tasted like freedom, like 2 years of searching and surviving and building something strong enough to hold us both. Like the promise he'd made on the cliffs finally coming true. When we pulled apart, I was crying. Happy tears this time. Relief and release and the overwhelming sensation of being seen, not as a project or a symbol or a mistake, but as myself. Where are we going? I asked. Ethan smiled. Anywhere you want. Paris, Tokyo, New Zealand, or just away. Somewhere you can breathe. Somewhere you can figure out who you are when no one's watching. I looked out the window. The jet had broken through the clouds now, and above us was nothing but stars. Below, the clouds looked like an ocean of silver, endless and beautiful. I want to go somewhere no one knows my name, I said. Somewhere I can just exist, without being the Kingsley charity case or the abandoned daughter, or even the girl who got rescued by a billionaire. Done, Ethan said. We'll land in New York, refuel, and be in Europe by morning. I have a house in the south of France. Small. Private. No one will bother us there. He squeezed my hand. Take all the time you need. Figure out what you want to do next. Go back to school, start a business, write a book, learn to paint, whatever makes you happy. I'm not here to save you, Ariel. You already saved yourself. I'm just here to make sure you never have to prove your worth to anyone ever again. I must have fallen asleep somewhere over the Atlantic, because when I woke up, soft dawn light was filtering through the windows. Ethan was working on a laptop, but he looked up when I stirred and smiled. Good morning, he said. We'll be landing in about an hour. I stretched, still half in a dream, and looked out at the endless sky. And then I thought about you. Yes, you. The person reading this, listening to this, watching this story unfold. You might be sitting in your living room right now, or on a bus, or in bed scrolling through your phone. You might be in Boston or Berlin, or somewhere I've never heard of. But if you're here, if you've followed my story this far, then maybe you know what it feels like. To be told you're not enough. To work yourself to exhaustion trying to earn love that should have been freely given. To be erased, forgotten, discarded by people who claimed they cared. If you've ever felt that way, I want you to hear this. You were never the problem. The people who couldn't love you, who wouldn't see you, who made you feel like you had to shrink yourself to fit into their narrow definitions of worthy, they were the problem. Not you. Never you. People can erase your name from their pictures. They can delete you from their websites, block your calls, pretend you never existed. But they can't erase your purpose. They can't take away who you really are. And sometimes, I know this sounds impossible when you're in the middle of the pain, but sometimes being abandoned isn't the end of your story. It's just the moment you learn how to fly. The Kingsleys taught me to be small, to be grateful, to accept scraps of affection like they were precious gifts. But leaving them taught me something better, that I was never small. I was just surrounded by people who needed me to be. Home isn't where you're accepted conditionally. Home is where you're chosen completely. And if the people who were supposed to choose you didn't, that's not the end. That's just the beginning of finding the people who will. The jet descended toward the French countryside as the sun rose, painting everything gold. Ethan took my hand as we prepared to land. Ready? He asked. I thought about the girl in the server's uniform, invisible under the chandeliers, holding a tray with trembling hands while the family that threw her away celebrated their compassion. I thought about the 7-year-old staring at a photograph, believing she'd finally found home. I thought about every moment in between, the hope and the heartbreak and the slow, painful learning that love shouldn't hurt like that. And then I looked at Ethan, at the life we were flying toward, at the endless sky outside the window. Yeah, I said, and I meant it. I'm ready. The wheels touched ground softly. We'd landed. But really, I was just learning to fly. To everyone who's ever been told they weren't enough, you are. You always were. And the moment you realize that, the moment you stop trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it, that's the moment the sky opens up. And trust me, the view from up here, it's worth everything. My name is Ariel, and this was the story of how I learned to fly.